Thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Brandon Boyd. I'm with the Washington Stormwater Center. Today's presentation is going to be on effective staff training for pollution prevention. Like I said, this is Stormwater Awareness Week. We have a lot of other activities going on. I encourage you to check those out as well on our website. I'll provide links in the chat after my portion of the presentation. For today's presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the municipal and the industrial permits and talk about what training requirements are in those two permits. I'm then going to talk a little bit about what I expect to be in the 2025 kind of that finalized industrial permit. If those of you who are aware, that permit is currently in the draft stage. It's set to be released in about a week. And there's been a lot of comments on the training topic, so I'm going to kind of address what those might look like as ecology pushes that out. And then I'm going to pass it on to Nathan Hardebeck from CWT Academy, who's been doing stormwater trainings for the better part of the last 2 decades. And he's going to have a lot of much more interesting information than I have. So I hope you'll stick around for it. So I'm going to start out talking about the municipal permits and some of those training requirements. A couple of caveats before I begin. There's several MS4 permits, as you all know, phase 1, phase 2, Eastern and Western. Most of these requirements are roughly the same, but I'm going to be looking at this through the lens of the Western Washington phase 2 permit. So if there's any nuance between those, I hope you'll look into your own permit for that information. I'm also far from an expert on these municipal training requirements, and I know those of you who are familiar with it will correct me if I misspeak somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about kind of who needs these trainings and what these trainings need to cover. Kind of that first topic is illicit discharge and illicit connection staff. So the permit says here, an ongoing training program for all municipal field staff who, as part of their normal job responsibilities, might come into contact with or otherwise observe an illicit discharge or illicit connection to the MS4. And that training needs to include topics such as how to identify these scenarios, how to respond to illicit discharges or illicit connections, and how to report them, who to report them to. And one kind of common theme amongst this municipal permit is that these topics are pretty much a broad umbrella of staff. And you really, when you're developing this training program, you want to really narrow down that audience and identify what specific trainings they're going to need, how often they need them, and what that curriculum looks like. So this table here was taken out of a document that Deanna with the municipal permit assistant staff at the Stormwater Center created with help from several jurisdictions, Thurston County, and I think a few others as well. And really kind of what this does is it came out of a training guidance, and it identifies the audience and kind of what that training should look like depending on the audience. So using this illicit discharge, illicit connection staff as an example, your field staff is going to need a much different level of training as those IDD investigators who are going to need a much more robust training on things like source tracing, investigations, maybe dealing with hazardous material, that HAZWOPER course, or whatever that might look like. Doesn't want to change. There we go. Continue on with those municipal training requirements. It's all staff whose primary job duties are implementing the program to control stormwater runoff from new development, redevelopment, and construction sites. So this new development, redevelopment, and construction staff, this includes groups that are doing the permitting, who are doing plan review, site inspections, and enforcement. So this needs to cover, those specific job duties. And again, we have identified those audiences and talked a little bit about what that curriculum description looks like, training delivery, as well as timelines. And one thing I failed to mention before is that, this training needs to be repeated. You need follow-up training as needed to address your changes in procedures, techniques, staffing, So when you set these training programs up, they really need to be current. And when new procedures come online, you need to address those. Continuing on with the municipal permits, this includes construction operations, maintenance staff. So implement an ongoing training program for employees whose primary construction operations and maintenance job functions may impact stormwater quality. And several things that need to be covered in this training, again, water quality protection, operation and maintenance standards, inspections, relevant stormwater pollution prevention plans, B&P selection, and then several, again, those job specific best practices, things like street sweeper operation, as well as reporting. And then again, we've identified kind of these audiences and gone over some of what that training delivery might look like. Also within that municipal permit is source control staff. Your source control staff needs to be trained on their legal authority for source control, best management practices, inspection protocols, and have some case studies as well, typical cases, as well as lessons learned and that type of thing needs to be included, as well as enforcement procedures. So that's kind of a general overview of the municipal permit. I also want to highlight that training can be an important part of adaptive management as well. If you're having some issues with pollution, within your jurisdiction, really taking a look at your training program and make sure that it's not a result of improper training, and addressing any training lapses that might occur. Just kind of transition into the industrial permit requirements. I also want to highlight, and this is something that Nathan mentioned as well, is the importance of training your permitting staff on not only kind of that municipal requirements, but as well as the other permits. So, if you have a permit counter worker, somebody comes in applying for a construction permit, that worker should be able to see, hey, this site is over 1 acre in size. It's going to discharge into Boggy Creek. You're going to need a construction stormwater general permit. Here's what the requirements of that are, and be able to kind of help them get through that process a little bit. And that applies to things like UIC, the industrial permit, as well as others. So I know that was quick. I want to give Nathan as much time as possible. I'm also going to go quickly over the industrial training requirements. And what the industrial permit says here, again, this is from the draft permit. This is subject to change when the new permit is released. It says the SWIP shall include B&Ps to provide SWIP training for all employees and contractors and vendors who have duties in areas of industrial activity subject to this permit. Contractors and vendors may be excluded if the permittee has an employee who has been trained on the SWIP supervising the activity at all times. So really kind of the major change here with the release of this draft permit was the need for these contractors and vendors to be trained. This was probably the most commented on portion of the 2025 draft permit. A lot of people with concerns of, there's so many contractors and vendors coming in and out of our site. We see 50 to 100 a day, truck drivers, that type of thing. That's not feasible. That type of comment was pretty common. I think that will be addressed in some capacity with the final release. We'll talk about that in a minute. Continuing on with the industrial permits, talking about the frequency and schedule of training, the permittee shall train all employees annually at minimum, and all employees must be trained within 30 days of hire, regardless of full, part, or seasonal time. And the importance of record keeping, I didn't mention that with the municipal permit, but that's also required for both permits, and is very important, is keeping these records. A log of the dates on which the specific employees received the training. This log must be kept with the SWIP and made available upon request. So again, this 30-day requirement is also a new part of the permit, as well as the importance of the record keeping. Also, several comments around this 30-day period. I've had groups, express concern. A lot of times your hire date and your starting date don't necessarily align. Maybe somebody's taking a couple of weeks off. Maybe they're finishing up at their old job, finishing up those responsibilities, but are technically on your staff. That 30-day window can shrink really quickly. So it's important to keep an eye on those training dates. So now I want to talk quickly about kind of my expected changes in this permit. And again, I mentioned the contractors and vendors being a very popular comment topic with the 2025 draft. And based on my conversations with the permit writer, they are looking to address that. I don't think it's going to be removed completely. Based on my conversations, it sounds like it's going to be something like it's contractors and vendors with duties in areas of industrial activity and potential to impact stormwater quality. I think the idea is to kind of reduce that number of contractors and vendors that need that training. Others have said that's pretty vague, that potential to impact stormwater quality. So how that gets implemented and how that gets finalized will be important to see. They're also floating out the idea of extending that training deadline, that 30 days of hire, and making that 90 days for permanent employees and keeping it at 30 days for temporary employees. So again, none of this has been finalized yet. I think it has to go through the final stages of approval, but some stuff to look out for as that permit gets pushed out in the next week or so. I briefly want to talk about just the content of this training before I pass it on to Nathan. Really kind of three major topics here. The stormwater pollution prevention plan, how your employees make a difference on your site, and best management practices. So for the SWIP, the employees need to know basically what's in your SWIP. And I think it's important to really highlight certain things within the SWIP, things like potential pollutant sources, best management practices that are found on your site, really so your employees get an understanding of what's in it. They also need to know who maintains the SWIP. I think that's important to say. If you see something, you need to say something. And this person, he manages the SWIP. He's in charge of this stormwater program. This is who you need to report to, as well as the location of the SWIP. We're talking about employee role. We want to talk about the employee's role in complying with the SWIP, preventing contamination, and how they impact BMPs and making sure they're maintained and in place, as well as going over best management practices, things like spill response procedures, good housekeeping procedures, maintenance and material management. So really, one thing I want to highlight here with this content is it needs to be site specific. You need to be talking, some of this is broader category, but you really need to be hammering home what it looks like on your site, what spill response looks like on your site, what BMPs you have at your facility, what, you might have this multi-million-dollar treatment facility that has some obvious maintenance issues that this staff can identify and report to the proper people. So really want to hammer home just this idea of making this interactive and site specific to your facility. So I'm going to pass it on to Nathan. Nathan, I'm going to stop sharing. And as I do, I will introduce him. Nathan started training stormwater management in 2002. I was in second grade when he started providing these.
Nice, Brandon. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I thought you would like that. He started CECL training in 2006. He's built ISGP and MS4 training programs that ran for about a decade for ECOS. He created CWT Training Academy in 2020. He has certification programs in 4 states and is working on his 5th. And the courses he offers through the academy are recognized by EnviroCerts and other organizations for professional development and continuing education credits. So Nathan, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about training program. Training's been an interesting part of my career. started off as a nice to and has morphed into uh, a more significant portion of what I do in the stormwater industry. I'm on the tour at this point right now until about May going into next. So, training has become a much more significant element of what I do. And over the time that we started working in the stormwater industry, the training, how we deliver the trainings has also changed. So we're going to try to highlight some of those differences there. I also want to say it is Stormwater Week, so this is a stormwater focused presentation. However, a lot of these concepts and a lot of these things that we're going to talk about in developing a program can be implemented into safety or other training programs that you're looking at moving forward. But let's look at some of what the research is showing and what some of these um, independent surveys are starting to look at. And we're starting to see where training is becoming a much more important element to many of the employees that work for businesses as part of their career development and how they view their role in the company and where they see career growth happening for them, that they feel that training is part of that element of being successful in their job. And we need to present the challenge, and the challenge for stormwater is really this: you as a business or you as a municipality, you have a whole administrative group and leadership that is focused at economic growth. It's focused at a lot of different services and infrastructure pieces. And you may be blessed as the stormwater person. You likely didn't. You may have graduated and got a stormwater degree because you can do that now, but it's likely if you started it, when I did, and in that time, you were trying to figure out what this stuff was while you were blessed being the person, and you may have been the person that got donated this opportunity. And immediately you start reading things and learning that there's a language that only stormwater people speak. And so you become sort of this isolated person over here that's saying, hey, we need to do all these things. And this gap is created between what's necessary to meet this requirement and all of the other focuses of the business administration. And then, of course, new regulations come in and new pollutants of concern get discovered and more acronyms get made and permits make more pages and we have more things to cover and that gap gets wider. And it seems like the stormwater group becomes potentially even more isolated away from what the business focus is. And you're having a hard time bridging the gap of that communication. And I think what a lot of entities and businesses and municipalities don't realize is it's not the stormwater group's permit or it's not the stormwater person's permit. It's that entity's permit and it rains on everybody. And no matter what you do at that business practice, whether it's driving to the office location, whether it's operating there, whether it's spending maybe spending time outside around the catch basins, whatever, we all have the ability to affect compliance with the permit and managing that rain that's going down the drain. And generally, the only way to really bridge those things together is through a very robust education and training program that communicates to everybody about the importance of stormwater management. And or oftentimes through our industry, we also have to learn through pain. And I am a firm believer that if we can get that education out there, oftentimes we can reduce or limit the exposure to that pain with fine and penalties. And that's how we bridge the gap oftentimes with our administration and our operations, is making sure that they understand the importance of stormwater management on pieces of property and that everybody has the ability to influence that. And just like you might not have been a person who got a stormwater degree or volunteered and raised your hand to be the stormwater person, you probably also didn't know that you need to be a communication specialist, that communications was going to be one of your largest aspects of your job, and being able to communicate effectively this dynamic world of stormwater change. And as these permits come through, and you got people like me that are talking to you, and they're saying all these things, and Brandon just said a couple things that especially about the industrial stormwater permit, and I'm going to sidebar here for just 1 second. Really important y'all pay attention to the industrial stormwater permit. It has opened up 3 or 4 potential large exposure items within this permit, and Washington State is really leading the way in the nation for a lot of this discussion. Um, but it is significant, especially the definition of transportation, which is likely going to influence municipal operations and maintenance yards. Um, this training requirement within 30 days. This is the first time where I've really seen Washington adopt something that Oregon has been doing. So Oregon's had that criteria for many years, and I'll talk a little bit about the challenges that those create. But pay attention to this industrial permit. We're within days and weeks of that being released. So make sure you're looking at that one. But getting back to this, you've got all these permit changes and people talking to you about that, and you're trying to input all that information. Now you have to export that information. You have to translate it, and you have to talk to vendors and suppliers, which is now going to be a requirement with the industrial permit of, hey, please don't, make sure your vehicles are maintained when they come on my piece of property because you're dripping stuff over my drain. Or as you're offloading, you can't do it this way, and you have to make sure that you're doing things properly. And then you're going to have to tell your staff about making sure that they don't wash things into the drain. They don't sweep things in the parking lot there, even with all their good intentions, that they're not creating illicit discharges or illegal dumping into the storm system. And then you got to have the really uncomfortable conversation, which is going to your manager or your employer and saying, hey, we're going to need more money to be able to manage this. We're going to need to add something to the budget to make this communication effective moving forward. And we're going to have more things that are going to affect our bottom line of operations. So the need, and why do we need training? And I'm going to try to get past this pretty quick, but oftentimes we start with, because the permit says so. There is a checkbox that we have to meet in permit requirements of meeting some type of training in the stormwater permit. And other things that can drive the need for training is that there is an update in policy or procedure, or because of a new pollutant of concern, there are new practices that we have to implement within our jurisdiction or at our operation to monitor for certain things. There may be a new sampling requirement. You may be now measuring things in parts per trillion rather than just taking a visual measurement, which is going to require you some more training. New technology is pushing the need as well, and making sure that inspection reports are now being done virtually on smart devices. You may have a GIS network where you have to input that information going forward. Some of you may have permeable asphalt or permeable pavement parking lots, and you're trying to figure out what piece of equipment can I use to clean that after 2 years, or it's been clogged up with moss or debris or whatever it's going forward. And another aspect of this is inputting or capturing undocumented information. And we're going to talk about that in a minute here, and how the need for training is so important, because we are losing a lot of our what I'm going to call street knowledge, or uncaptured data from how the stormwater system goes. That's got to get captured before that person retires. Okay. Brandon already covered this. I just will also say that there are some new potential operations that municipalities are going to need to look at when it comes to building washing and PFAS and all that. We don't have time to go over those, but it's important to know the new permit requirements, because there is going to be a training element that's going to have to be created out of that, not only from a you've got to train the operators of how to do it, but you may also have to train the inspectors on how to prove that what the operators did is not causing a stormwater effect. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this, that making sure that we understand new technology, GIS mapping systems, that our maintenance activity is being captured and input into those systems, that we are identifying asset management this way. You know, a lot of you probably have asset management systems and you're trying to teach field staff about how to operate and do those inspection reports and report to that infrastructure. And then, you know, how to use new pieces of equipment, how to utilize um, some of you industrial facilities may have a new treatment system that you've got to figure out how to operate, and what happens when an alarm goes off, and how do we make sure that we're um, managing the media or the chemistry that may be going through these systems as we go forward. So lots of, you know, as things grow or as new technology develops or new BMPs get implemented, there's an additional training requirement that always goes along with that. And I hear this a lot when I go onto pieces of property is, you know, we don't have anybody to replace so and so and they just left, or I don't know how this water flows. We should ask Joe. Oh, Joe retired. How do we get this information into our system ahead of time? And how do we utilize training to capture those pieces of dialogue and start a conversation about it? Oftentimes, when I'll go in and do a training, I'll bring up a topic and somebody in the back will say, "Nate, that's not how it works here. That's not what we're talking about. Ours operates this way." And nobody else knew that in the room. It's just held into that person's knowledge database, and that's the opportunity by which the truth is comes out in that discovery. A lot of folks have been saying to me, we are really looking at how we are going to replace our sweeper truck driver or inductor truck driver. There's not a lot of folks, and frankly, the trades industry is lacking in terms of um, people that want to get on pieces of equipment, and there's a huge training gap. And how are we going to fill this void space of operations that's starting to we're starting to experience moving forward? And the challenge is that as entities, you invest in people to do these operations, and their loyalty to what you're doing has a lot to do with how they feel about where your company is going or how your organization operates. And we're seeing a lot of folks leave and abandon, and we're seeing a lot of the good skill sets being traded. Traded's a bad term, but you understand it in sports. It's like we're gonna go we're gonna go pay for somebody else's. We know that there's a really good operator over there. We're gonna steal them and bring them into our operations. You're seeing a lot of people change business cards, if you will, because there's a finite resource out there. So how are we going to build this gap, fill in this gap of operational requirements that are necessary with our stormwater programs? So we know that there's some needs that are out there. We know that we got to have these training programs and permit requirements, but how are we going to pull this off? What are the logistics? First, and I think this is Brandon highlighted this, is who really needs this training. We know that time is money, and we need to identify within our organization who needs the training and at what level they need the training. Are they just somebody who's needs to have a general awareness, or is it somebody that needs to deep dive into this because we've got to be able to respond to the materials that we store on this piece of property? I'm going to tell you that anytime you put a timeline on when somebody needs to be trained by, that adds pressure to the system. And it often becomes very reactionary. And this 30 days within new hire threshold has been a challenge for Oregon stormwater permittees to meet. Not only identifying who, sort of when does the clock begin, but also it generates inefficiencies of training because now you're trying to train individuals to catch up with the group, if you will. So there's some real challenges with how do you get this thing accomplished, and you're going to have to start working with your HR department, and it's going to have to be a box that they have to check before they can go to work. So it's an additional criteria with our permits that's going to add some time and logistics and intra-departmental or even interdepartmental conversations about how do we get this person out to work and meet this permit requirement at the same time. Reaching beyond your walls to your customer base, to the vendor base that comes out onto your piece of property. That's another thing. Are they going to sit down and watch something on a computer before they get on your site? Are you going to do it with signage? How are you going to communicate to people that come onto your piece of property that stormwater is an issue and get that communicated out? Brandon covered some of this, so I don't really need to go over it, but I want to say this, that I can go anywhere in the country and talk about 70% of stormwater the same way. Water always runs downhill. Turbidity is an issue coming off a construction site. We got to manage for concrete washout, but it changes drastically based on geography. It changes drastically based on permit requirements, business operations, practices. And so to enforce, or not enforce, but to emphasize Brandon's conversation, you need to have a training program that brings relevance to the on-site property, that it's not just a generalistic, holistic baseline, but it also brings in what's happening on that property or what's happening within that jurisdiction that's specific to your group, that they can relate to, that they can resonate with as they do their job. Those things are very important to be able to customize a training to your operation. We'll talk about how we do that going forward. And it's really about building this culture around your program. And it requires that your managerial staff and that your leadership supports that engagement, that it's not just just check the box and get it done, that there's really some effort that's taken at making it your own, that making it your piece, that you're communicating to your staff about issues that are on your site. Now, the challenge of this exacerbates when you start talking about the fact that you have to talk to the same group of people about different things. You may have different permits that are operating on your piece of property. Ports are a real challenge when it comes to stormwater management because they not only have to talk about municipal related things and having all the programmatic elements, but you're also going to have to talk about, construction activity and the mining operation and industrial tenants and all those different things. They're all going to have to play into this common infrastructure. Municipalities have very similar things to that. Or if you're an industrial operation and you have multiple facilities, those facilities behave differently. They have different flow environments. They have different potential BMPs or risks based on the water going to different receiving waters. You may have different shifts of people, different emphasis levels of importance of stormwater management based on those shifts potentially. So trying to get all of, if you're not just looking at one operation and one footprint, but you have multiple operations or multiple hours or multiple shifts of people, now the continuity of communication gets challenged because of the fact that you have so many different folks to talk to about these things that have different aspects of their management. And of course, you got to figure out how to pay for this stuff. There's got to be a budget for it. If you're going to have support BMPs or you're going to have show and tells or you're going to cater the thing, are those people approved to be on a vendor's list? Can they do these things for you? Cecil's a great example. Cecil, I hope you guys all know what Cecil is, Certified Erosion Sediment Control Lead for construction activity that's an acre or more in disturbance. It's a requirement to be certified. And one of the requirements of that course is to have a field component. and setting up a field site and having a safe place to do it with parking and putting BMPs in. And, some classes do things like make false rain events. And there's all this logistical stuff that goes along with getting people on other pieces of property. And then, of course, if you're going to hire somebody outside to come in and do this for you, does that entity that you're hiring have the ability to do the work? Do they have to get a business license within your jurisdiction? Are they going through some proposal process that's going to affect the budget or the cost of the thing? It's going to affect the timeline in which this thing can get executed, because you're going to have to jump through those other hoops before you get there. Do they have to go through some type of payroll system and get set up through that? So all of those things influence how the timing of things and the costs of things moving forward. And then you got to decide who's going to give the training. Are you going to do it? Or are you here's in a lot of cases, folks don't want to be the person who communicates to everybody. They feel like their voice is not being heard. That when they talk about stormwater, that they're just sort of a resounding gong and nobody's paying attention. In some of those cases, it's a good idea to have somebody from the outside come in and talk about it, because then you can sort of play the good cop, bad cop. Like if I come into a jurisdiction and teach about stormwater, they could say that Nate guy, he's crazy. And yes, it's all important and what he said is truthful, but here's how we're going to do it. And it sort of gives you the ability to say, to buffer, if you will, against the regulation. You don't have to be the bearer of bad news, if you will. You hire somebody else to be that, and then you come in and um, become the bridge of the regulation to the people that are working there. And it's so important that the speaker, that the trainer, is neither disenchanted with the stormwater permit. There are a lot of trainers that get up and are really just talking from a stormwater perspective about, it's just basically complaining. And that gets hard to listen to. It's also not great to have somebody get up there who's hyperactive about, throwing their hands up in the air and talking about everything's going to kill a fish. Everything's going to kill a fish. We have to figure out how to create a vulnerable and balanced message so that it's received and that there's a path, there's an ability to move forward, that we identify what the importance is, but that we also have to move forward with our business practices. You may want to have multiple instructors. You may want to have people play off each other. And then, of course, we got to talk about the method and how you're going to deliver it and how long you want it. And I want to say something about length, because a lot of permits require that certain trainings have a length to them. A lot of trainers are potentially filling that time with stuff that's just doing that, filling time. And I want to be cautious. I just mentioned this as a caution to you that if you're trying to communicate something, giving a training that's not killing people off and just filling them with fluff. A lot of how a person leaves emotionally out of a training has to do with whether or not they're going to retain the information. If they walk out of that going, "Oh my gosh, that was just death," they're not going to remember what you said. And so it's really important to find that balance of meeting a length requirement, but do it in such a way that it's not just a bunch of filler to get people through and through that time period. So there are several obstacles to developing a robust training program: time, cost, and motivation. You're going to be asked by people that are managing a budget, do we really have to do this? You're going to have to explain why. You're going to want to try to move them from the have to a want to, and that's a big deal. And a lot of that has to do with the quality of what you're offering, as well as the effectiveness and the efficiency of what you're offering. So coming up with something that has an engaging delivery to it, you may want people to walk away from this with something from it. I cannot tell you how excited people are about getting a little laminated car pocket at the end of a Cecil class. They love that. That's the biggest thing. And when it's very disappointing when somebody signed up last minute and we didn't have the card created for them and said, "Oh, we're going to send it to you in the mail." It's like deflating because they wanted to walk away with that thing in their pocket. How do you take that thing that's going into their pocket and incentivize your staff, incentivize your employees to get more of those? Help that develop their career, help that cross train them, help those type of find incentive programs that can help them get more opportunity within your organization as they move forward. If they are more trained and they're more incentivized to do this, you're going to find a happier worker who's also going to be able to do more things for you. They're going to be a better investment. They're going to produce more for you. And a lot of the stats that are out there are saying, a lot of the training that we are seeing is just not effective. It's just not been for a variety of different reasons. And listen, you're not going to be able to please everyone. You're just not. Everybody learns differently. And when I send out surveys of my classes, I'll just share with you. This is a class I was given in Montana, and asked for the response. And they said it was like watching Jello rot. That was the comment that was made about my class. And then at the same time, I had all these glowing things about this is the best training I've ever taken. So you got to be careful and not worry too much about the extremes and try to find out if you met the mass there. But really, it's the quality of the training that's the important part, and how people end up leaving that training. Did they just endure, or did they actually get something out of it? And make sure that it's relatable, that it has real world applications, and the trainer should be able to not just regurgitate things off of slides or things that they've read, but they should be able to bring in some real world applications and bring that um, perspective of having experienced this stuff to the audience that they're talking about. So let's marry the obstacles and the logistics together and talk about how we overcome some of these things. Number one, the more that you can budget for training in your program, the more cost savings you're going to see. You're going to be able to come up with different payment options. You're going to be able to have a timeline that can get everybody where they need to go, when they need to be there, all those type of things. When we have to be reactive, oh man, we got to have this before we start this job. Somebody's got to be Cecil certified. You just got to find something, and you're going to take whatever's available to you. And it's generally a credit card payment. And if your folks can't pay with credit card, then it's another delay, and you're trying to figure out how to do that. And you're not taking the class looking of it. You're taking it because you need it. And frankly, I'm going to tell you that when we get into this 30-day new hire type of thing and these criteria with industrial permits, oftentimes that's where things default to, because it becomes the last thing that we got to check the box with. Then you got to ask yourself, am I training just individuals one at a time? How am I going to make sure that I'm getting that person tracked as part of my annual training and meeting that criteria? How do they fit it into their schedule? And then or looking at a group, and the getting everybody done all at once is really cool, but that means that everybody's not doing other things for your business or not doing other things for your operation at the same time. It's great because you got everybody on a cycle, but now you've taken a large portion of your production away and put them all into their own group or into their own room. The other thing is that when you have multiple departments that need these different types of training, but each department's managing their own training budget, you're oftentimes repaying for things over and over again, because you're not training across those departments. And so that's where your training can become more expensive over time. We also have to understand that our audiences are changing. I've been doing this for about 24 years. My philosophy and thought about how training is delivered and taken is my technology's opened up some new opportunity. I was very resistant to a lot of things 20 years ago that I'm not as resistant to as now, because technology's created opportunities for them. We need to allow people to, or we need to give opportunities or training programs that are helping people build their career. And we have to think about the delivery method that we're taking that, and that different age groups potentially have different comfort levels with how they're going to receive that information. We'll talk about that with some stats going up here. And one thing that's super important is to be mindful of your, if folks have English as a second language, and making sure that you're just not losing people. They're not just sitting in a room, not able to absorb things. You're going to have enough um, diverse content to meet your demographics. And it's, for some of your operations, that's a lot. It's a lot of different languages that you may have to cover. I'm not going to read these, but I think it's just interesting to look at how different generations view how, what format or what way training is effective for them. Um, I will say that a lot of our younger generations, our upcoming employees, really believe, they really want to know the why behind their doing their job. They do. It's not like eh, maybe when I was growing up, your boss would just tell you just because I said so, and that was okay. Because I said so isn't okay anymore. People want to know why. They want to know why they're being asked to do this. Rationalize this for me. Give me the understanding behind this, and I can either get behind that, or I'm going to have conflict with it, but at least I know why. And a lot of times we're not spending enough time on the why. We're talking about the what and the how, but we're not giving people the background about the why to do it. And sometimes you're going to find out of that a gem that somebody takes that why on and says, I want to be a champion for this cause. I'm with smart devices, you have to listen. If you're still using VHS tapes and DVDs, you might want to think about updating your training program. There are so many new opportunities and on-demand based training. People, I'm currently doing a home remodeling project because some of my old infrastructure in one of our places um, crapped out. And if I want to learn how to do things, I generally get on YouTube and I try to figure out how to do this maintenance project, or, replace a light socket or whatever that is. And there are so much of our younger generation that just defaults by going to a computer screen and pulling something up on their phone and pulling those things out. That group, you got to satisfy some of that need as much as you need to satisfy the need of everybody being in a room and talking together. So you got to be able to balance that between the different age groups or dynamics or learning styles that people have in your entity. So that sort of goes into, are you going to do just in-person things? Are you is that where you're going to focus? Or are you going to try to find something that's been recorded that you can do on demand, that you can play at any time? Oftentimes those recorded things, the investments up front. You're going to have to purchase something. You're going to buy into a subscription. You're going to create something. Maybe you're going to make your own training video, but that cost can amortize over time the more times you use it. Whereas every time you do it in person, you're going to sort of have to go through all that process. And maybe you want the interaction. Maybe you want to have the dialogue with the instructor, and you want to have this back and forth with the people that are there, or you really need to have the hands-on aspect of this. You're going to have to think about those. And frankly, a lot of these are hybridized. If you can hybridize this, where you can get the baseline information understood by some on-demand platform or some prerequisite criteria, then you can be more effective and efficient in the field, and you can find time in the field to do those things like you want to. Um, these are the last few slides here, and I'm going to go through them quickly, but record keeping is such a huge aspect of this. And tracking people on Excel spreadsheets and tracking expiration dates and when do you need to recertify and all those kinds of things, very difficult to manage with differing departments doing it differently. And anyway, there's just a lot of folks that are moving towards these learning management systems where as people log on and as they register, they can come in and they're going to take their class. It's going to track that they took them. They're going to put in an expiration date. It's going to send them alarms when the next, when they need to be, go through the class again, or all those types of things. Really want to encourage you to start investigating some of these in educational reporting systems and streamline your management system into something that allows people to take allows the flexibility and make sure that it's tracking all this information so you could download it for your annual report or whatever it needs to be in terms of your communication to regulatory authorities or your employer. Most people want to they want the training to be easy, and if you can make it fun and engaging and you can have a dynamic speaker, you're going to have people that aren't going to drag themselves into your training program. So it's really important that it's not just something that you do to check a box. I just want to bring this, up over and over again, that you find a way to make this from a have to a want to, and hopefully find a path internally that incentivizes those people to help grow their career in that area. We're going to have to find how to do more with less. We're being asked more and more from our stormwater permits, from our management. There are more and more things for us to do. Technology's moving us forward. How are we going to incorporate this training content to bridge the gap of stormwater management between our leadership and our business making and economic decisions with the people that are actually have a lot of influence in the field about whether or not we're going to be successful with our permit? Uh, Brandon said this already, but it's your staff, your field staff are the eyes and the ears for your jurisdiction, for your business, your stormwater group that's out there. You need that feedback from those folks, and you need to teach them what they need to look for so that you can put appropriate response mechanisms in place. This training of not only your staff, but people that go beyond your walls and go beyond, the general public, your customer base, your vendors that are in there. These are exposures that if we don't have a plan for them, and if we don't have a way to track this information, it's an exposure to a citizen lawsuit or people that want to hold you accountable to your permit requirements. So it's really, really important that you find your organizational balance, that you find your way that's going to work with your team, that you find a record keeping system that's going to be effective for you, that's going to centralize this information so that you can get it, but also be able to disseminate it out to the other offices or the other departments that you may have in multiple locations. I really just want to, if you're new to the stormwater industry, welcome. This is a place that you can grow and develop. And I think part of our job as trainers or people that are building training programs is to also paint that pathway, highlight that pathway for other employees that are within our organization. All right, we wrapped it up there. Brandon?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Looks like we got just maybe a couple of minutes left. I did see one question in the chat asking, you talked about it a little bit, but the question is, can you discuss what portion of a business entity's environmental slash EHS budget should focus specifically on stormwater?
I can't answer that. I will give you, listen, if let's say EHS means that you're going to talk about your employees' well-being and their safety. You're going to talk about safety-related activities, and then you're going to talk about what happens outside. I would say from a percentage basis, you need to be sort of a 40 30-30 split, that you need to focus on your individuals first. You need to then talk to them about their safety and their practices internally. But I'm going to tell you that stormwater and the outside activities and their ability to affect that is a huge portion of that. And frankly, your exposure of risk of not complying with your permit outside oftentimes more identified than the stuff that's inside. So, from a risk standpoint, you need to make it a high priority for sure. And the closer you are to a receiving water or sensitivities around your property, that number may even increase.
Thanks, Nathan. That's all the comments I see, all the questions I see in the chat. You guys, everybody sees Nathan's information here. A great resource for you, and I encourage you to check out his website, as well as stay tuned for when that final industrial permit is released. We'll be sending out some communications around that as well, and get everybody together to talk about it. So keep an eye out for that. There's nothing else. Thank everybody for their time. Thanks, Nathan.